Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Nintendo Switch 2 and compare it against the PlayStation Portal and see which particular gaming console is the better one for you. Now, the first thing I will definitely tell you is that when it comes down to both of these types of consoles, these two devices are very, very interesting when it comes down to it. You have to remember that on something like the Nintendo Switch 2, this is like a dedicated console. This is something that you can just buy on itself, and it's going to be its own standalone console. You can take it wherever you want to. You don't need to be on Wi-Fi. You can buy game cards. There's a game card slot. There's a lot of stuff inside the Nintendo Switch 2. Inside of the PlayStation Portal, this is a little bit different. This is a gaming console that you can rely on a PlayStation 5. You'll have to kind of have a different console in order to really kind of use it. You do have some online capability where you can go ahead and use it directly as its own console without having to go through and switch up to something like another type of console for the most part. But the thing you're going to have to remember here on the PlayStation Portal is that the gaming library is really predicated on what you can get on the PlayStation 5 or what's available inside of their PlayStation Plus account, subscription model. So it's a tiny bit different, but when it comes down to the hardware, this is actually kind of an interesting situation. So looking out at the outside, and even before that, the price tag. If you want to pick up either one of these, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. But the price tag is slightly different. The PlayStation Portal is significantly cheaper than the Nintendo Switch 2. The PlayStation Portal is going to be costing around $200. The Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be costing about $450, like minimum. So that right there is going to be a slight difference right there if you're kind of looking at both these types of devices. Because if you're looking at it from that way, there's going to be some situations where you might end up looking at some other devices on the Nintendo Switch 2, and you might be like, wow, this is actually a pretty expensive type of device when it comes down to it. So although it's not the biggest deal in the world, it could be one thing that you might end up looking inside of something like the Nintendo Switch 2, and you might be turned off about that price tag. So that right there is one of those small things to keep in mind there. Now, one of these other things to keep in mind here too is that with something like the PlayStation Portal compared to the Nintendo Switch 2, their displays are slightly different. So with the Nintendo Switch 2, this console is giving you a 7.9-inch LCD panel. It's a really good panel, and I think it actually looks really, really nice. It's 120 Hz, and although it's not like the most beautiful console of all time, it has its pros, it has its cons, I still think this thing looks pretty good when it comes down to it. And if you are about to go through and pick up a gaming console, I genuinely do think this thing's not a terrible idea. There's definitely way worse types of consoles you can go and buy, and this gaming console display looks very good for the most part. With the PlayStation Portal, this one's actually a little bit different. So this one's going to be giving you basically a 8-inch LCD panel. So this one's a little bit different. It's a bigger size display technically. It's still 1080p, but it's 60 Hz. So that right there is kind of an advantage for the Nintendo Switch 2. Just getting that type of feature set right there, again, is a little bit more of an advantage on that type of device compared to something like the, Nintendo Switch 2. I would also say when it comes down to the design of both these consoles, they're, a little bit different as well. The PlayStation Portal is almost like a PlayStation 5 controller, cut in half, split in two, and a display in the middle of it. It's kind of an interesting type of layout. I do think it was an interesting approach by, PlayStation and Sony, to say the least. But I would still say for the most part, getting a console like that, it still looks pretty cool, and I do think it's a very interesting type of design that Nintendo kind of threw in here. With something like the Nintendo Switch 2, this one I think is more of a safe bet by Nintendo. It looks just like the other Nintendo Switches, and this one, unlike the PlayStation Portal, the Nintendo Switch 2 can actually take apart the Joy-Cons, the controller themselves, and make separate controllers from them. That right there is actually a really big advantage inside of that gaming console, because that right there kind of gives you more ability and capability when it comes down to it. So if I'm about to go through and pick up a gaming console, I actually do like that a lot inside of something like the Nintendo Switch 2, because it does give me a little bit more capability from that side. So like I said, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but if I'm about to go through and pick up a gaming console, I do think that is kind of a nicer advantage inside of something like the Nintendo Switch 2 over the PlayStation Portal. They both charge via USB Type-C ports, but the Nintendo Switch 2 does give you 2 USB-C ports when it comes down to it. So I do think that side in and of itself, that is another really cool advantage that you're getting inside of that gaming console when it comes down to it as well. So that right there is another really cool thing to keep in mind there too. On top of that, when it comes down to basically every other area about these types of devices, the PlayStation Portal, it doesn't have a dedicated game slot inside of it. So I do think that is kind of one of those things to keep in mind. If you are about to go through and pick up a gaming console, I do think, getting a console like this is one of those really big things to keep in mind here. With the Nintendo Switch 2, you have the ability of getting these games to actually run natively on this console. not via the cloud, not via anything else. You can download games inside of the Nintendo Switch 2 because it is a dedicated gaming console. The PlayStation Portal is kind of a streaming device first. It goes through and syncs up with your PlayStation 5, and it can go through and, you can play those PlayStation 5 games. You do have the PlayStation Plus games you can play on this thing and stream, but I still wouldn't call this like a dedicated gaming console because it just doesn't have like everything that you need for a gaming console to actually run. Like you can't store the games on the PlayStation Portal, and I do think that is kind of a disadvantage for this type of gaming console. So like I said, it isn't like the biggest deal in the world, but if you are about to go through and pick up a console, well, it would be nicer to be able to buy one that might be giving you a better experience. And that right there is one of the bigger things to keep in mind there. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there as well. On top of that though, I will say for the PlayStation Portal, if you're stuck playing these PlayStation Plus games and you have a PlayStation 5, if you're trying to go on the go and you're trying to play these games, I think that might be okay for some people, right? Especially for $200. It is in the middle between being an accessory for the PlayStation 5 and being kind of a gaming console and a cloud streaming device. It's like right in the middle because you don't necessarily need to be like on you don't need to have a PlayStation 5 to play the games on the PlayStation Portal now, but it doesn't really feel like a dedicated gaming console either. Unless you're just stuck, unless you want to play PlayStation Plus games all the time. That's kind of the one way to kind of think about it. On the Switch 2, I feel like this type of gaming console is good. It's really a dedicated console. It's really, really good, right? That's one thing I love about it is that it's just a dedicated one. You can play all your games. If you're really in love to the Nintendo lineup of games, the Switch 2 is going to be a really good option. This one's going to be giving you a really good experience. And I do think that right there in and of itself is going to be another awesome thing going on for this type of gaming console when it comes down to it. But I would also say for the most part, if you do have something like a PlayStation Portal, when it comes down to the actual capability behind it, your PlayStation Portal is just a streaming device. So there's not really going to be the most expensive chipset inside. The Nintendo Switch 2, this is going to be giving you a much faster performing type of chipset and capability inside of it. And also because it is a dedicated one, it's just going to be giving you much more power inside of it as well to play those types of games. You could argue that with the PlayStation Portal, if you're streaming from a PlayStation 5, that might be more powerful. But again, you have to buy a PlayStation 5, then buy a PlayStation Portal. The Nintendo Switch 2, you don't have to have a Nintendo Switch docking, all that stuff. You can just buy a Nintendo Switch and play those games on it. So, in my opinion, what I would tell you, I really do think a device like a Nintendo Switch 2 is a no-brainer. This one makes a lot more sense to go and buy. It's a beautiful type of, Nintendo Switch. And I do think that one is the one I'd recommend way more people to go and pick up. I think with something like the PlayStation Portal, this is one of those types of gaming consoles that I think is, okay. Like, I struggle to even call it a console. But I do think if you are in the market and you want to pick up a device, then if you have a PlayStation 5, go for it. But I wouldn't just buy it without a PlayStation 5. I would much rather recommend a Nintendo Switch 2, since that is a dedicated gaming console versus the PlayStation Portal. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.